Well, this time I'm coming at you live, or rather slightly delayed, from Grand Island, Nebraska, which can only mean that I am on my way to work. I got the call and have been driving across the country the last day and will arrive in Utah probably tomorrow. So this is going to be my last video for potentially a month. There's always a chance I could upload one in the interim, but I doubt it. We'll see. Usually I'm pretty busy and I usually do not have the internet capabilities to upload videos, although I'll still be around to comment, make comments, that sort of thing. Anyway, this is not just an update video. I did want to talk about something. In my video about consensus socialism, somebody asked who is this Miss Sexy Socialist I was talking about, and I haven't had any dealings with her since my comment wars with her 2 months ago. But I said, well, I went ahead and found her page and sent it to this commenter so they'd see. And when I was there, I noticed that she had, I don't believe she uploaded it, but she had favorited or put in a playlist a video basically describing anarcho-socialism, anarcho-syndicalism, and I watched most of it. And again, it was pretty amazing. It was one of those really fast-paced, you know, bullet point, presentations where they go pretty quick. And the very first things they said, like the very first words were, assuming that hierarchy and power are what causes all oppression in the world. And I was like, why do we assume that? Can we even qualify either of those variables? Can we correlate them to oppression or standards of living or anything? That's a big assumption to make. I mean, they're building a foundation on basically not something that's completely without basis. I mean, power is something that the word describes something that has an effect on reality. So does hierarchy, but they're fairly vague when we get to concrete physical things. And I'd argue that really most oppression that's done by the state anyway isn't based on brutal force. You know, the states in most circumstances, most of the time, are not physically forcing people to do things. There's a threat, which is still coercion, but they're not, grabbing people by the scruff of the neck and forcing them to work in factories or work in gulags or anything like that. And they are sustained not by hierarchy, but by ideology. And so, not that ideology is a perfect explanation of anything either, but it's, I think, a much better one. Um, in certain circumstances, states do operate on sheer force whenever you have a literal occupying army that's enforcing whatever demands are coming from the state in martial terms, then yes, but no state can do that to its entire society, at least for very long. So the video, it's fast paced, but right off the bat, it basically swings and it misses. Or maybe it's someone trying to hit a home run and they maybe nick the ball and it. I don't know why. I don't like baseball, but I guess the World Series is subconsciously getting into my metaphors here. But that wasn't the main reason I wanted to talk about it. Is again, and I've addressed this before, and lots of other people have addressed it before, the whole work for a boss equals coercion. You're being coerced if you work for a boss. This has got to be one of the worst, I don't know if it's the worst, and it's certainly not the only one, equivocations that socialists engage in. And it's ad nauseum. I don't know how many times I've heard it. And the repetition is just really hard to bear because it's so stupid. And it's kind of ironic too because well, let me come to that in a minute. Basically, the argument is, the cliche is, well, if you're being coerced because if you don't work for a boss, then you'll starve. And firstly, that's not true in most circumstances. Very few people in the West especially, but even around the world, are in the situation that if they don't work for a particular boss, they will starve, and even if they don't work for any boss, that they will starve. Uh, Aside from charity, and I include with that the broader context of familiar charity, so family members who would sustain you, which would take care of most of that. There are people who can be self-sufficient, at least to the point of being able to not starve. You can become your own entrepreneur. It's just a silly thing to decide. Now, for a boss to be coercive, what they would have to do is maybe run around like at the beginning of Planet of the Apes on horseback with um, gladiatorial combat nets and collars and grab people by the scruff of the neck or around the throat and capture them and corral them into a factory and then whip them and maybe threaten them by pointing guns and spears at them and locking the doors and having overseers, ride around to keep them. That would be coercion. And it's a big planet, and there are places where that does happen sometimes. Sure, I'm sure it happens. It might even happen in the United States, although I think it would be extremely rare. Uh, of course, it used to happen a lot more when we had slavery. Uh, and these anarcho-syndicalists will love to find examples where it does happen, say in China or India or Bangladesh, although most of the examples they find don't even meet this criteria. It's just somebody who has a very low skill set, very little, very, very unproductive worker, mostly because of a lack of capital, but also perhaps because of a lack of education. Uh, so they don't have a high wage, and so they look at that like, oh, isn't that terrible? That's not coercion either. But there is actual coercion. I've heard of it happening, and they like to look at that and then equivocate that to all wage slavery or wage employment generally, which is an absurd exaggeration. It's hyperbole to the point of being meaningless. Uh, so, in their uh, worldview, anytime if someone came up to you and just said, you know what, I'm going to just pay you 8 hours a day. You don't have to do anything. I'll just give you 8 hours or $8 for every pay you 8 hours a day. I'll pay you $8 an hour for 8 hours every day. Just basically, I'll give you $64 a day. Socialists would find nothing wrong with that, and it could be money or it could be food or some other good. It doesn't matter. Socialists, oh, that's fine. But if that same person comes and says, well, I offer to give you these things on the condition that you do something for me, and that thing could be work in my factory, mow my lawn, um, keep company of, watch over my kids, walk my dog, whatever. Oh, then all of a sudden, it's coercion. It's slavery, and that's just absurd. Um, the idea is, and I think there's only two kind of ways. This implies there are two ways that exchange would be one. One is if I think socialists would be satisfied with the worker-employee relationship if there were two conditions. One, it was unconditional, so like I said, you could just give somebody something, they're like, oh, that's fine. Or if the worker got to unilaterally set the price and say, okay, I'm going to work for you, and you're going to pay me this much. Now, the way the socialist looks at it is that's what the boss is doing anyway, but the boss isn't forcing people to work for them. Uh, and I kind of look at it like uh, if you ever see someone who's broken down on the side of the road, every car that passes them, they don't stop and help that person. So are they coercing them because they're not helping them? Because they're not, you might say they're being lazy, or they're being jerks, or they're being dicks, or they're being douchebags, but are they coercing the person who had a car accident or had car trouble, can't move? No. And if one person stops and says, I'll help you, but I need $5 for it because I don't have very much gas money, or maybe he doesn't give a reason, he just says, I'd be happy to give you a lift, but I'd like $5. Is that person coercing them also? No. And the other kind of ironic thing here is if employees are able to demand, are entitled to unconditional, I mean, because this is the thing, is they'll say, well, the boss, he's giving them money, but it's not really helping them, because he's only doing that on the condition that he be given labor or whatever service the person is providing in exchange for the money. So would they feel better then if it was just unconditional exchange, where the laborer can just go and say, okay, you owe me money? Because what that is that's just the inverse way of looking at slavery. Instead of saying, uh, you have to work for me, saying you have to give me something, like cotton, for instance. You have to give me cotton. I'm entitled to cotton, so you have to give it to me. I shouldn't have to pay you for that, because I have a right to it. And that's kind of like the most politically incorrect but still totally valid example that I can think of. You're not being coerced by your boss unless he's actually but by him not helping you, if by him not going out of his way to provide you things for free, that's not coercion. To not be given something is not coercion, except in the context perhaps of, them grabbing you, throwing you in a pit, shutting the door, and then starving you to death. Yes, then them not giving you food is murder or starvation or coercion. But that's only because they put you in a set of circumstances where that was the case. If they didn't put you in the circumstances where you need to eat, then it's not their fault. You can't blame them for that and start saying, hey, you're being coercive. The fact that you need to eat is not the fault of other people. The fact that you need income for shelter and healthcare or whatever is not the fault of other people. You can't blame them for it. And if they offer you a means of obtaining those ends, and on a conditional means, you can say, well, I don't like the conditions, and you can try and find a better offer. And in a market economy, there always are other offers. Maybe not always better ones, but there always are other ones. But even if you can't, it's still not their fault. They're not coercing you. Nature's coercing you. And of course, a socialist system would never work if we had unconditional exchange. If the socialist system says, we will give you whatever you, quote, need or want, or whatever they want to say, that will never work, because then there is no, this is the oldest problem in socialism, is the incentive problem. Why should anybody work if it's unconditionally going to give you whatever you want? And it's not going to give you, they're going to say, okay, you have to be a member of the collective, you're going to have to work so many hours a day, maybe we'll demand only what you're from each according to his ability. So we'll say, okay, you're not very smart, you're not very industrious, so we'll have you sweep the floors, but you got to do something, because we can't just give you stuff, because then nobody will work. Well, that's conditional exchange. That's coercion then, if a capitalist were to do it. So again, and this is very ironic, because Miss Sexy Socialist kind of bills herself as, and she didn't produce the video, but she's putting it out there, as she's got the more refined arguments for socialism, the better ones that, a lot of people don't like socialism because they've got a poor understanding of it. They've been misinformed by the propaganda out there. But there's nothing that she doesn't know about economics and politics and political philosophy that she didn't learn from a Ford Foundation textbook, which is also very, very ironic. But these are supposed to be, and maybe that's not fair, because she's alleging this and there's not any consensus that this is true, that she has the more refined arguments, or she's relaying the more refined arguments, because again, she did not produce the video that I'm referencing, she only promoted it. And yet the argumentation there, it's based on clearly dubious, if not completely false, assumptions, and then filled with equivocations. I mean, just chock full of things that are clearly not the case. And the principled examples, I mean, like getting paid at a lemonade stand. Oh, that's slavery then. I mean, but then a collective that owns everything, that has a say on everything. I mean, even the consensus system that they like so much. Couldn't you say having to have a debate with everyone in your consenting unit, however big that is coercion against you. I mean, you have to spend the time to deal with it. It's time out of your life, time out of your day, energy. I mean, you have to burn calories that entire time, and you got to get those calories somehow. So there's a cost imposed on you by this consensus process, by your, whatever debate, whatever irrelevant debate that was brought up by somebody, could be anybody for any reason, and you have to address this now at the expense of your life force, or a diminishing of it of some time, not to mention a waste of your intellectual capabilities to spend time trying to persuade idiots who don't know anything or don't have any say or won't be affected at all about your own life. I think that's a lot more like coercion than anything my boss has ever done to me.